What is up, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome into another episode of the SEC on the College Huddle. I am your host, Michael from the Vol Fanatic Show. Unfortunately, Chris unable to make it again tonight. Planning on being back next week. A little bit of a crazy work schedule for him. But tonight, I am joined by Daniel from the Gator Truth podcast and also Landon from the My Dogs Are Barking podcast. So, fellas, how y'all doing tonight?
I'm doing great. Thanks for having me back. It's been a little while, and it's always good to see Landon.
Oh yeah, man, it's gonna be a great time. And hey, as we are recording today, we are 1 week away from the release of College Football 25 as we record it today. And man, we have just got a little bit longer to go until the official college football season kicks off for real. It's gonna be a great time.
Yeah,
Yeah,
it's T minus I think 54 days today, something like that. So it's getting closer, man, and I cannot be more excited for the college football season. So tonight we're going to look at a possible confirmation of a 9-game schedule coming in the SEC, and then we're also going to give our head coaching rankings entering the 2024 season. So we will start with the topic that I brought to you guys. Is it confirmed now that a 9-game conference schedule is coming to the SEC? So a little backstory. Yesterday, Vanderbilt canceled a home and home with Colorado State for the 2026-2027 season. That is now the fourth SEC team to cancel non-conference games to get them down to 3. There is only 3 schools that still have a fourth game for the year 2026. That is Florida, Mississippi State, and Missouri. 3 teams have canceled non-conference games since the spring meetings. So, I want to hear your thoughts on this. And Daniel, I'll start with you. Is a 9-game conference schedule coming, starting the way it looks in the year 2026?
I believe it is. I think that when it was proposed, was it last year? It was proposed, and almost everyone but Alabama and Nick Saban was on board at the coaches meetings with the 9-game schedule, along with the I believe it's the 366 scheduling or the 188. Um, with having either one rival or 3 teams you like that would play all each other and then 6 rotating, kind of like how we see in the ACC. Um, Definitely is interesting that we've seen lots of cancellations. I'm not sure if Florida's going to get a cancellation. They're probably, if that is happening, looking to reschedule. Currently, just from the Florida perspective, we've got a trip to NC State. We host Cal. And of course, we have our Florida State along with Campbell's coming. So I don't see us playing a 12 game Power Five, all SEC and ACC teams. Yeah, Cal Golden Bears being ACC still freaks me out a little bit.
Yeah.
But with that said, I'm sure the teams like Florida we've not seen canceled that 4th game are probably in a spot where they have a contract and are just looking for a better year to play their games rather than cancel something that'd be great for the fans like an NC State or a Cal or whatever any other school has coming.
Yeah, and the 3 schools that have not canceled yet, they're the ones that are still the most against it right now. Vanderbilt was one of those until the cancellation as of yesterday. So, Landon, same question to you. Is a 9-game conference schedule coming?
Yeah, I think it's at this point it's inevitable. I'm glad Daniel brought up the point that yeah, Alabama and specifically Nick Saban seem to be, kind of speaking against it. It just seems as if that this is the direction that it is going in. And honestly, if you look back at kind of the trail of everything, what does it come down to? Cash. The amount of money that the revenue for so many, from the TV networks to the local economy, whenever an SEC school is coming into town versus some random non-conference is certainly a difference. But ultimately, the people who win outside of the folks who get more money in their pocket are the fans. Think about week 10 and week 11 when things are really coming down to the wire and you're talking a lot about your team or the big teams. There's not much worse than getting up on a Saturday and looking at the slate of games going, man, like it's my team versus mashed potato Tech or some random team you never heard of before. And, oh man, but Tennessee's playing tonight in the prime time. Who do they have? Oh, it's Ball State or whoever the case may be. So the ultimate thing is it does seem like this is where it's going. And if I'm a fan, this is another part of great news because we get more great games.
Yeah, absolutely. And Daniel brought up the if you go to a 9 game, it's going to be that 3-6-6 model versus a 1-8-8 model. Personally, I would absolutely love that 3-6-6 model because there is so many. I guess you would say secondary rivalries that you want to preserve because Florida Georgia would probably be the one rivalry game that would stay in the SEC. I would also like to see Florida keep that LSU rivalry. All right, Mississippi State. It would be Ole Miss, Mississippi State, without a doubt. That's the rivalry that would stay there. I would like to see Mississippi State keep one of their rivals, and I'm sorry, Landon, for not knowing one of those other teams that y'all would consider a rival. But for Tennessee, I would really love it
Kentucky?
for Tennessee because, yeah, I would love to see Tennessee, Kentucky keep playing. But the one rivalry in that 1-8-8 model that Tennessee would keep would be Vanderbilt. And, I want to see Tennessee keep Kentucky. I want to see Tennessee keep Alabama. You also want to keep the Auburn Georgias, stuff like that. So that's why I am for a 9-game conference slate because you get to keep some more of those secondary rivalries. And
quick question, Michael.
Okay.
When you think about the different methods, I know you mentioned I think there's three to four teams ish that are opposing at the moment. Do you know how that works? Like, do they have to reach 12 out of 16 teams? Do they have to reach what's the point of no return where they go, okay, we have enough votes, this is now happening?
Okay, that I'm not certain about, but I'm pretty sure that is majority rules. So if we got 16 head coaches, athletic directors, whatever. I think it would have to be a 10 to 6 vote or a 9 to 7 vote, something like that. And I do know that there's still schools out there, Tennessee being one of them, that have not leaned one way or the other since the spring meetings. They don't have a matchup on the books for 2026, but they have not leaned one direction or the other. So there's still some that are kind of on the fence. There's some that are for one, and there's some that are for the other. I find it really interesting that since the spring meetings, all of this has come about.
Yeah. But with SEC Media Days coming up, I believe it's next week.
Yeah.
Which you want to talk about a great week. You have college football 25. Good luck with guess when that releases next week. But you have that dropping, and then you have SEC Media Days. What a better gift for SEC football fans. And I imagine that's why you catching on to things like teams dropping that fourth non-conference game. I think it's for some big announcement coming up next week. So I could see us next week be sitting here talking about, all right, it's been announced, and here's maybe that 3-6-6 type model. Tennessee's gonna keep Florida and Alabama, and then Kentucky or Vandy, while Florida will probably keep Georgia, and then Tennessee, since I've already mentioned them, and then throw in
LSU.
Yeah.
And because of how it's being discussed already in the media circles, I would imagine, as you mentioned, SEC Media Days, the commissioner will be asked about it next week. Somebody somewhere will push on them.
Yeah, absolutely. And we are now going to be joined by Caleb from the Hogs on the Hill podcast. He's been recording another episode tonight, and glad that he is able to join. So, Caleb, appreciate you coming in. We have been discussing a little bit about a 9-game conference schedule possibly being confirmed. What are your thoughts on a 9-game conference schedule coming to the SEC?
I really could see that being a possibility. I was talking about it on another show about, it seems like that's the way we could be headed with how the playoffs are expanding, and they're talking about potentially expanding to 16 teams, you're looking at a lot of playoff games that you're going to have to play. And what comes along with that, I think, would have to be a shortened conference game schedule.
Yeah, I don't think I disagree with you there. But just a little backstory for you. I'll kind of keep it brief. So, the Vandy canceled a home and home for 2026, 2027 with Colorado State. They're the fourth one to cancel since the spring meetings. Or sorry, the third one to cancel since spring meetings, fourth to cancel to go down to 3. And there's only 3 teams right now that still have 4 non-conference games for the 2026 season. So it's kind of looking like 2026 might be that time. Nothing confirmed, but how do you feel about 9 games conference schedule? Would you prefer it to stay at 8, or would you like it to go to 9?
I think that's an interesting thing, and I think when you look at it, and if you look at it for a team, with conference wise, thinking about the SEC and looking at just where we're at right now in Arkansas, that it might make our season, our schedule tougher, just because you're not going to have one of those quote unquote easier games that would be a win on that schedule compared to the gauntlet that you're going to have. That's the SEC.
Yeah, I mean that's absolutely right there. So, anybody else have any thoughts on this 9-game schedule before we move ahead?
I'll just throw in there again. I'm interested to see if it happens, which I believe it is, but also how they deal with that schedule and how they're going to format it. Whether it is 1/8, which has been thrown out there, 3/6, or even another weird thing that was thrown out was the pods, where you essentially have many divisions and then 6 random games. So we'll see. I'm excited to see what happens over the next few years.
Yeah, it'll be interesting to see. I have heard and seen a lot of the coaches don't like the pods. I think that one's kind of been thrown out, but it's between that 1/8 and that 3/6 model right now. So we're going to go into our SEC head coaching rankings entering the 2024 season. So I'll let you guys decide. Majority rules. Do we want to go from 16 to 1 or 1 to 16 on the coaches?
I think 16 to 1, like bottom to top, because I'll be honest, if I heard, number 1 at the beginning, what else am I here to listen to except for to see how low Landon puts Lane Kiffin on this list?
That's right. Let's get the bat out of the way early. So, yeah, 16 is good.
All righty. So we will start with 16. And let's see, Landon, let you go first. Who is your number 16 on this list?
Yeah, I'll tell you, I'll start out just by putting Jeff Lebby there because we just don't know. A lot of people come from coordinating backgrounds that are promising and encouraging, but you just don't know until the first game is played. And so while he has had innovative offenses, he's also had a lot of talent where he's been an offensive coordinator. And so I think we're going to get a peek. Obviously, we'll see very soon. But I would just go ahead and put him at 16 right now, just because I don't know. I feel odd without him coaching a game at the helm, putting him anywhere above somebody else who already has. What about you guys?
Caleb, let you go next on this one.
Yeah, I'll kind of agree with that there. You never know what you're going to get when you go from that coordinator tree instead of a former head coach. You bring up somebody that, yes, they were good at their position, whether coaching offense or defense, but how do they go about being in charge of the entire team? You've almost go from you've got one half of the ball that you're worried about, these set of guys, to now you're having to run the program, being over recruiting, being over the offense, over the defense, special teams. Yes, you have your coordinators for that, but you're the guy in charge now that everybody looks to for answers, especially when it comes to nowadays with media and everything. All the blame, if things go bad, it comes to you. If things go good, it goes to you. So compared to, you're not taking the blame of that when you're in one of those coordinator roles.
Yeah, and I'll say one more thing regarding Jeff Lebby is, think about another former coordinator turned into a head coach. Joe Moorhead came from Penn State, was with Saquon Barkley and Tracy McSorley, had a very promising offense, and just was not able to handle personnel at Mississippi State. He had winning seasons, went to bowls, both beat the rival Miss both seasons. And now, fast forward, if he has one more bad year as the head coach at Akron, like he's about to be selling insurance, So you just never know what the process will look like. So that's why I let Lebby's at 16.
Yeah, that's fair. Daniel, who is your number 16?
Funny enough, I just got to throw this out there. Former, as Landon's talking about selling insurance, it's been hot among the Gator Twitter for the last day that former Florida and Mississippi State offensive line coach John Hevesy is currently working at Lowe's. So just a little something to throw out there, since he's talking about selling insurance and he may not be far off. But anyways, I'm not gonna go typically. I usually, for new coaches, I will start them at average and then, put them around the middle, since we don't know, could be great, could be bad. And then if there are people that I know, okay, for sure, have good things, I'm going to put them ahead of that new coach. But if it's not been working out for the coach, at least so far, I'm going to drop them below that new coach. So I'm going to go higher on Levy than most have, and actually everyone so far. And I'm going to put Clark Lee at number 16. I know it's the Vanderbilt job. He did beat Florida, which is probably one of his, if not his biggest win at Vanderbilt. But we've seen, even with Vanderbilt over the years being Vanderbilt, we've seen some coaches in and having some little bit of success. We've seen Vanderbilt go bowling a few times in the last 20 years. And I'm not saying he has to be in a bowl every year, but he's not really been close. So that's why I have him there at number 16. And of course, it's only going to get harder for him.
Yeah, and I'm going to agree with you with Clark Lee there at 16. For me, for one thing, he's not, you see most coaches, they're a guru of some kind, either offensive or defensive. He's not really a guru on either side of the ball. He's just one of those, I guess you would say, kind of overseeing head coach, or however you would put that into words. And then also, he took a huge step back this past season. You talked about the win that he had over Florida 2 years ago. They went 5-7, a game away from being bowl eligible. And I was really high on Vanderbilt last year. I had them going 5-7 again with a possible bowl game. And they went 2-10 with a loss on the road to UNLV that looked just terrible. And it doesn't look like it's going to go up from here. So that's why I have Clark Lee at number 16. So number 15, we'll just kind of skip around, that way each person gets a chance to go first. So Caleb, I will start with you. Who is your number 15?
Yeah, for me, it's going to be the guy you just talked about, Clark Lee. I think it's a coin flip where, depending, you can have those, like you said, Daniel, there, grace is given to some new coaches sometimes, depending on whether being their first year. But, yes, Vanderbilt's a tough job. But at the end of the day, you still are in the SEC. You still, should be able to, in a sense, recruit better than maybe some of these other smaller conferences. And it just seems like they seem to struggle in all those aspects when, taking a step back last year, going 2-10 from a 5-7 year where you're close to making a bowl game. When you're that close, it seems like you've got to take that momentum and carry it forward. And that just didn't happen last season.
Yeah. So Daniel, I'll move on to you. Who is your number 15?
Well, this one, I've got to say, sorry, Caleb, but I'm going to go with Sam Pittman. Started promising, but currently right now, after, this is going into year 5, and I hope to see a lot more, but after 4 years, it hasn't looked like it's an uphill, uphill climb, or at least steady. I mean, again, as we talked with Clark Lee, he does have a win over Florida in his notebook or in his record, which I've heard some fans, and maybe Caleb can answer this for me, but that win actually got him to this season. I don't know if that's true. Caleb, do you have any insight to that?
I think that's probably a real possibility. You look at last season with, there was a lot of hype and intrigue going into last season. You have, what was going into last season touted as one of the top quarterback running back combos with KJ
Yes.
Jefferson and Rocket Sanders. And, you come out the gate, Rocket gets the injury week 1 against, one of those quote unquote cupcake games. You get a BYU game that you should have won, had plenty of opportunities to win, and you give that game away. And, I was at that Florida game. My mother-in-law is a Florida alum, so we decided to go down and see her and went to that game. So I'm glad to say I got to go on the road and see that win, but, that is a very real possibility. I could see that being a big portion of why he did get, another, year here. And I think a big part of that too is when you look at it, changes had to be made. And, the big splash with bringing in Petrino, I think that's, almost a last heave, if you will. And if that doesn't work this year and you don't at least, in my opinion, go 500 and make a bowl game, then, it could be the end of the road for Pittman in Arkansas.
Yeah. My number 15 might surprise y'all. I've got Shane Beamer at number 15. I'm not a big Shane Beamer fan. I feel like that he is a guy that should be a coordinator, especially a special teams coordinator. I mean, you got to give him credit for that. He's got some fantastic special teams calls, no matter what point of the game it is. But I feel like the success that he had in his first couple of years there was just the talent that was on the roster at the time, kind of helping him out some. And, the South Carolina Tennessee game in 22 is a big sore spot there, but there have also been reports that Harbaugh talked to some of the opposing teams' coaches, kind of giving them, kind of tipping them off about some play calls because of the whole situation there. For teams that they might possibly play in the playoffs. Do I believe it? Not really, but some people do. But I feel like that he just took a big step back last year, and if it wasn't for Spencer Rattler on that team, they would have been 3-9. I mean, at the best, and I just don't see it going up from here. So that's why I have Shane Beamer at number 15. So Landon, how about you?
Yeah, I'll make it quick. It's Clark Lee. If you're going to be a defensive coordinator, that's the side of the ball that you really lean on. Even if you're at Vanderbilt, it's just got to be something you do well. Even Derek Mason, who struggled his entire career, had some defenses that were at least respectable. I think Clark Lee's team last season gave up 30 points or more in more than half of their games. Some games very ugly. So yeah, he's 15. But we feel for Vanderbilt because who really can get the job done there? But as far as SEC goes, he's 15.
Yeah. So Daniel, we'll start with you on number 14.
You and I actually were not far off in our rankings. I have Shane Beamer at my number 14. A lot of things that you said, Michael. And to be honest, one thing that he does have, I mean, we talked about the success 2 years ago. He does have a win over the most hated rival for South Carolina, which is Clemson. He motivates his players, but at the end of the day, he did, lose to a struggling Florida team in 2022 in Florida's possibly their most dominant win that year against a SEC team. Then last year ends up sub 500. And it looks like it's going the wrong way. Like you said, Spencer Rattler, a big deal, but I'll be very curious to see what he does this year. I do think it's a situation like a lot of these coaches near the bottom of the list where another losing season and you've got to pull the plug, especially as the SEC gets harder. You need someone that can at least make that bowl and show progress. And I think that's a theme I have for Clark Lee Pittman, Beamer, and even my next one, which I know we'll get to in a minute. But for that, that's why he's down there 14. Again, I know Landon had Levy down at the bottom. For me, Levy's not hit that level of downward projection yet, so I'm keeping him at least at the watermark. The ones below him are currently underwater, but it could change.
Yeah, so I'm going at number 14, Sam Pittman, and it being that same downward trajectory. I mean, he looked good in his first couple of years and set some high expectations for Arkansas. And since those high expectations were set, he hasn't quite met them. And last year was a very disappointing year for Arkansas. You had injuries. You had an offensive line that could not keep KJ Jefferson on his feet. You had a lot of close games that they played in last year that, a possession or two here and there, a play or two here and there. And we're looking at an Arkansas win instead of an Arkansas loss. Caleb, you mentioned the BYU game. I can also think of that Alabama game being one. I believe, was it LSU? Was that another one that was like a one possession game, something like that? I mean, there was numerous games last year that Arkansas was just that one play away, that one possession away from winning. But if there's not some improvement this year or some sign that things are going to go up, then unfortunately, I think that Pittman is going to be gone. And that's why I've got him, because of that downward trajectory, at number 14. Landon?
Yeah, I'll agree with you at Pittman there. You said a lot, so I'll keep mine fairly short. But it seems at this point it's almost like, when you're watching a movie, and there's just kind of an obvious setup of how this thing's going to end. The gasoline is can is real close to the match, and you go, okay, I kind of see where this is going. So the writing is on the wall by many aspects. Honestly, I think one of the final things for me that made me go, man, how much control does he have, was bringing Bobby Petrino back as a coordinator. Not in terms of like, can he coach or not? I think he obviously can coach offense well. But it's just kind of odd. It's like allowing your ex to like live right beside you and you be almost forced to be okay with it. I don't know. It's just very odd. So I would say that he is kind of solidly in that 14, but he seems like such a cool guy. Like, man, I'd love to hang out and eat some barbecue with him. Dude seems awesome.
Get that good old cold beer. So Caleb, who do you have at number 14?
Yeah, unfortunately, I'm going to have to kind of agree with you guys with Coach Pittman. It is, this year's been, you're talking about those one-score games last year. Five games were decided with one score or less, whether that being a touchdown or a field goal. And, going back to last year, I had more hope that Dan Enos would have had a better offensive system with, the talent that he had there. But like you guys said, with the offensive line problems he had, and it's like one of you said, he is known as an offensive line guru. And when you have an offensive line that was as bad as last year was, that really makes you question things. And, I think that's where a lot of Arkansas fans are at, is like, you're an offensive line coach. Why are we this bad? And, I fully agree with that. I think, by the end of last year, and when they decided to cut ties with Dan Enos midseason, I really thought from the offense I saw, he was really trying to put KJ Jefferson in a box and not letting him do what he does best. And, I think that was part of it. It just wasn't a match there between those two guys. And like you said, I think this is a desperate last minute heave to bring in Bobby Petrino. If this is a success and, we do have a decent season, sure, it maybe buys him a little bit more time. But if he doesn't, a lot of people are thinking, I think for me, those first 5 games are going to be key. If you come out of those first 5 games 2-3, it's not looking good that you're going to make it through the full season. I saw an article that said an anonymous SEC coach said that he would be surprised if Pittman makes it to Halloween, which is a very likelihood. I mean, unless we can go out there and get some wins that we probably shouldn't, and maybe get some wins on, 2 of the easier games we're going to have on our schedule, with both those being on the road, with, me and my coach talking Mississippi State and Auburn are probably our 2 best shots for SEC wins this year. And those 2 games are on the road. yes, we have home games, but it's not going to be easy. But there's also a lot of unknown with you don't know what kind of offense you're going to get. If you get the traditional Petrino offense, you think about where, like he had back when he was the head coach here, we're going to put up a lot of points, and our defense, as bad as we were last year, looked pretty good. It was just we couldn't score points. So, I think this is, a hot seat season for Pittman. And, like you said, I feel like he's a really good guy, but can he step it up and show that he can belong as a coach, or is he just more of one of those guys that he's a great coordinator, great motivator, but when everything falls on him, it just didn't work.
Yeah, I think that's a good take on Pittman. So I will go with number 13 here, and my number 13 is going to be Jeff Lebby, just for the simple fact that he is unproven as a head coach. I think that one thing that helps him is being an offensive guru. So I'm very interested to see how this year goes. And one thing also that I think will help this year is there really is no, and this is just an outsider looking in, Landon, you can correct me if I'm wrong. There is no real expectations for this season under Jeff Lebby. It's more of a filling out process. You go out there and let's see what you can do. And, if you play an exciting brand of football like we have seen from his offenses in the past, I think that can only help him going forward at Mississippi State. So the unproven factor is what has him so low on my list. But I think that he can easily jump some of these guys in the middle section that I have going forward. So, Landon, who do you have at number 13?
13, I'm going to go with Mr. Billy Napier. And here's the thing. A lot of times in life, whether it's your personal job or not, a lot of the time when we get judged on what our performance is, it has to do with what's around us. And Billy Napier.
Landon, I think we might have lost you. You back now?
Can you hear me?
Yep, we can hear you.
Yep.
Okay, sorry about that. But obviously, he has had some talent at Florida and has just not been able to produce at the level that Florida deserves at such a top program. So for that reason, just with the resources he has had, he just has not been able to get it done. And be very careful with Florida's first 5 games this season, because on paper, several of them are winnable. But if some of those games are tripped up against some of those opponents, you might want to watch out.
Yeah, absolutely. Caleb, who do you have at number 13?
13, I'm going to go with the guy y'all just talked about earlier, Shane Beamer. I think it is, to me, this 12, 13, 14 are all very close and could be semi-interchangeable. And, I think it's becoming, a big-time year here for him. And, I'd like to see them have some success because, we got former Razorback is headed that way and Rocket Sanders is taking over there and that running back spot. But, I think it's going to be interesting to see, this is first year, different quarterback. You don't have Spencer Rattler, an experienced guy to kind of depend on to run the offense. And I think it's going to be interesting to see who he has as a starting quarterback and then what that offense looks like when you're transitioning to, a new guy under center.
Yeah, absolutely. Daniel, who do you have at the number 13 spot?
Landon and I are reading each other's minds. I have Billy Napier as the Florida guy again, where the trajectory is currently coming off of 2 straight losing seasons, which is not where Florida fans want it. We can talk about, we missed a game-winning kick against Arkansas, but then in overtime, you failed to, score a touchdown. And as the offensive play caller, when your defense isn't doing good, that's really what you need to do. For an example of a game, we brought him in for elite recruiting. There are times he's brought in some elite recruits, DJ Lagway, LJ McCray this last cycle. But the thing is, his classes have overall, as far as his high school recruit classes, have been smaller. They've been high quality for the most part, but in the SEC, if you want to be where Florida wants to be, which according to Billy Napier himself is competing for championships annually, you need both the quality and the quantity. His use of the transfer portal, at least at first, has been questionable. There's just as many success stories as there is, wow, I can't believe we had this person. He was left in a tight spot, but then when we're talking about marquee wins for Clark Lee and last year possibly saving Sam Pittman's job on a Arkansas team that I think had one SEC win. Obviously, that has Florida fans on edge. I know Landon had said, first 5 games definitely winnable. I agree with that. People that have followed my personal Twitter have seen me say, I believe you got to start 6-1 in that first 7 because that last 5 is brutal. With that one loss possibly being at Rocky Top, which that'd be hard as the Gators, I believe, are 18-2 in the last 20, or something like that, to say, hey, all right, we can lose to Tennessee. But when you face a Miami team that's also in year 3 and has brought in recruits, at this point, it's coaching. When you see A&M with a guy who's going to be higher up on this list for me, and Mike Elko, and only his 3rd game, or you're going to Jeff Lebby, brand new coach, or you're facing your little brother UCF, and then you have Kentucky, and then you have Tennessee, then you have Kentucky, a team you're 0-2 against, and the last game wasn't close. If you go 0-3 against Kentucky at Florida, especially with that being a homecoming game, there could be trouble. So for now, I would love to put Napier, and hopefully we do this next year. He's way higher on the list, but for now, I've got to put him in that underwater position. And hopefully, I've predicted on Texas's podcast here on the College Huddle, I told them I think we get to 7-5, and he's going to start to turn that narrative, and that's what I hope to see. But for now, based on these rankings, I have him at 13.
Yeah, I think that's a fair spot right there. So with number 12, we're going to roll back around to Landon going first. Who do you have at your number 12 spot?
I'm going to go Shane Beamer. The only reason why I like how we kind of got in different perspectives as we go along, kind of go overlaying some of the same. And he is now entering his 4th season, and there's a famous breakup song that just kind of on the bridge says the same line of, don't you think we ought to know by now? Like, that's how I feel about Shane Beamer at this point. Like, don't you think we should know coming into year 4, like, what he is? And this might be what he is, a guy who comes up every once in a while and wins a big game every once in a while. But because of the success that other coaches have in this league, and because the transfer portal seeing people turn around very fast, I don't think the South Carolina faithful are going to be very patient after this year. And at this point, I think this is just kind of proven who he is. He's a middle of the road coach, and if your university is okay with that, then it'll be all right. But I'm not thinking they are.
Yeah, I agree with you. Caleb, who do you have at your number 12 spot?
Yeah, we're all very similar thinking here with these 3 that we've talked about right here. Mine's Billy Napier. It's like you guys have already said most of like what you've got to consider, with the talent and, the history behind Florida, the talent that they can bring in, facilities, you name it. They have all the assets to be a top program in the SEC. And it's just, can you get over that hump and get those wins? I mean, like Daniel said, they had a chance last year, missed the game-winning kick against us, and then that gave us the ability to take it to overtime and squeak out that win. I think with a guy like you brought in DJ Lagway, and with a top recruit, you're going to have to come out and perform this year. I mean, I think it's getting close to that mark where you've got to show that you can compete in the SEC, and if you can't, I mean, like you said, you've got to have that quantity of recruiting besides quality. Yeah, you can bring in a few good guys, but if you don't have enough guys that can come in there and be program changing and kind of build towards the future, and I think that's what we've seen in some recruiting for Arkansas, is like, yeah, you'll get these one-off really great small recruiting classes, but how is that building towards the future? And so I think this is a pressure year, but I think the possibility that is there for, like Daniel said, to get to that 7-5 mark and upward trajectory, but that first 5 games are going to be key to how their season is going to go.
Yeah. Daniel, who do you have at your number 12 spot?
Okay, this is going to be my watermark. This is where I have Jeff Levy. Because you look at Jeff Levy, like everyone said, he's called some great offenses, both for Lane Kiffin at Ole Miss, for Brent Venables at Oklahoma, and now he brings it to what I will say is probably a rougher situation than it should be at Mississippi State, just because 3 coaches in 3 years, and not that I fully paid attention last year. Landon knows how much I loved Mike Leach. We've discussed it, but I don't believe the offense style last year was anything like it was under Mike Leach. And so you're going from a wide open passing attack to not that, to now a coach who's known for a high tempo offense. And that's going to, the type of player that each coach is bringing in, creates a mishmash of styles. So I'm very curious to see what he does. But again, knowing he's been a successful OC wherever I've seen his name, I'm at least going to give him the benefit of the doubt, because we've seen coordinators make the jump before. Kirby Smart right now, probably the best example of that, as someone who made the jump as a coordinator. Obviously a little bit harder position at Mississippi State than at a Georgia. But with that said, he's going to get my even watermark for now, and that's Jeff Levy.
Yeah, at number 12, that's where I put Billy Napier, and I've got him a little bit higher on my list because I think that he is a good coach. And Daniel, you and I have talked about this some off the air. I'll continue to say it, you've kind of corrected me a little bit on some stuff, but the situation that he inherited from Dan Mullen was a no-win situation, in my opinion. And, there's some other things that Napier could have and should have been doing better to go along with that. But, I think that he's a good coach. It's just kind of a situation he's been put into. Napier, if he does get fired this year, he's going to get hired by a mid-major school somewhere. He's just that kind of a coach. He also hasn't projected up, but he hadn't really projected down at Florida either. I mean, he was 6-7 in his first year, 5-7 his second season. So I mean, I guess you could say kind of trending down. But I mean, all of y'all mentioned it when you talked about Napier. The first 5 to 7 games are huge, and it starts with that opening night matchup against Miami. I mentioned it in our college huddle group chat. Is there any game bigger as far as coaching pressure goes than Miami versus Florida with Billy Napier and Mario Cristobal? I mean, no matter who wins that game, it's going to help determine what direction their seasons go, and if either one of those coaches have a job towards the end of the year. I do think that Florida gets a little bit of a good note. I guess you say a good note with the start of the season being Miami, Sanford, first-year head coach at Texas A&M, first-year head coach at Mississippi State, and then UCF at Kentucky, throw in Tennessee in there. They're all winnable ball games because, I mean, Florida has had good success against Tennessee in the past. So all of those are very winnable ball games, and I think that at the very least, you need to go 5-2 in that stretch to be able to have a shot at being the head coach next year at Florida. But I think you said it perfectly, Daniel. He really needs to go 6-1 to make sure that you're bowl eligible, because those last 5 games there, that Georgia, Texas, LSU, Ole Miss, and Florida State stretch, it's going to be hard to pull a win out of any of those games right there. So that's why I have Billy Napier at number 12 on my list. So number 11, Caleb, who do you have at your number 11 spot?
Number 11, I'm going with Brent Venables at Oklahoma. It's going to be interesting to see. This is year one in the SEC. You've got Texas and Oklahoma coming in. He had a successful year, 10 wins last year, 7-2 in the Big 12. And, he's a very much one of those defensive-minded kind of guru-type coaches that, he had some great wins last year. And you think about what he's done. Now it's going to be interesting to see what he does against some SEC competition. And as they go through, I keep saying it, the SEC gauntlet, and how his team and that defense can hold up. And plus, you've got to think they've got a new first-year starting quarterback with Jackson Arnold coming in, taking over for Dylan Gabriel, who transferred out to Oregon. So I think this is going to be an interesting year to see, how does he do in his first season in the SEC with a team that has its defense. You got a new quarterback. What is that going to look like for Oklahoma and their first year in the SEC?
Yeah, absolutely. Daniel, who do you have at your number 11 spot?
Surprisingly, Brent Venables, a lot of the same reasoning, and that's like it's his first year in the SEC, but also the question is how much of that success last year was the Levy Gabriel combination that he now doesn't have. We've seen before coaches, I'll say Ed Orgeron have great years because they brought in the right assistants, or Gus Malzahn, brought in the right assistants, and it was great hiring that moved them up, and then they didn't do well replacing after those hires. So until I see that Venables can do that, just based also on the quality and or longevity ahead of him on this list, I had to put him at 11.
Yeah, my 8 through 11, I could interchange at any spot. But number 11, I've got Hugh Freeze. He has done well at the SEC level before, but with this new stint at Auburn, he's only had 1 year so far. He went, I think, after the bowl game 6-7, but he was bowl eligible in his first season. Didn't inherit a good situation. We'll see where he goes from there. But I got to put him in my 11th spot right now. I do like Hugh Freeze. We'll see where he has Auburn going. Like what direction he's going to have them going this next season. Landon, how about you at number 11?
Yeah, I'm going Mike Elko. I know that Duke's a difficult place to win, but when you think about it, taking over a job like Texas A&M, he's only won 16 total games, like in the two seasons that he's been there. And again, I know it's a Duke, and that's a tough place to play and win. But man, I don't know. He's kind of a middle in the pack. I would assume a little bit below average SEC caliber. So yeah, I'm rolling with that.
Yeah, that's a fair spot for Mike Elko. Number 10, Daniel. Who do you have at that spot?
Number 10 is Mike Elko for me. And here's what I'll say. Duke was 3-9 in 2021. Not a great spot to come in, walk in, inherit, and no one's going to walk in and say Duke's going to get the best, transfer portal situation either. Walks in, takes a 3-9 Duke team, goes 9-4. And then also has a very solid year last year with the Blue Devils, earns this opportunity. I don't think he's in the top half yet. Obviously needs to prove it in the SEC, but seeing someone take over a program and basically say, hey, no excuses, I'm going to start winning. And he does. And it's not like Duke's ever going to be considered a football powerhouse. So I would say that's impressive for its feat. It's not the only time we've seen coaches do that. I mean, there's a very famous one back in the late 80s who went on to revolutionize the SEC. And who knows, maybe Elko turns into that. But until then, we're going to have him at 10.
Yeah, number 10, I've got Brent Venables. Y'all mentioned it. He's a defensive-minded coach, and he helped an Oklahoma defense that has just been absolutely abysmal in previous years. Definitely improved their numbers, but also, same thing that y'all mentioned, how much of that offensive success was Jeff Lebby and Dylan Gabriel last year. We'll see how they perform in the first year of the SEC. It's not going to be easy with the schedule that they have been dealt. I also questioned going ahead and extending his contract earlier this spring. I'd kind of like to see how he fares in the first year of the SEC before you get that contract extension, because I mean, in fairness, who exactly is going after Venables right now? I mean, you didn't, in my opinion, have to extend him. I feel like it was something that Oklahoma just did as a courtesy to him. So I want to see him proven in the SEC, and we'll see how he does this year, because he did have a good season last year after a 7-5 year the year before, I think. So we'll see if he continues on that trend or if it takes a step back in his first year in the SEC. Landon.
Yeah, I'm going with Venables. You mentioned the defense. Oklahoma, because of the offensive style, their defense is just always giving up a ton of points because they're always on the field. And last year, Venables' defense only gave up over 31 points 3 times the whole season. Oklahoma, like every game, was giving up 30 to 35 to 40. So he has certainly improved. I think I think Caleb initially mentioned it. Now the question is, though, well, now you're leaving the Big 12 and now you're coming into the SEC, and that is going to be a big question mark. But I think he at least has the quarterback right going into it.
Yeah, I agree. Caleb, who do you have at your number 10 spot?
Yeah, number 10 for me is Hugh Freeze. Yeah, we talked about it. He had a previous success in the SEC at Ole Miss. And he's back at Auburn now. 6-win season last year, comes in, takes over a program that a lot of people talked about would be a rebuild. That he brought an experienced quarterback, Peyton Thorne, coming over from Michigan State. Guy that they kind of played the quarterback swap last year a little bit with 2 different guys, at spots and times in the season. But I think he's a guy that proved himself, and if he can get the right recruits in, this being year 2, he could take a step forward from a 6-win season. We'll see. When you look at their schedule, those first 5 games they got, they could easily start the season 4-1, 5-0 before they go into a stretch against, Georgia and Missouri. So if they can capitalize on that, they could have the chance to have a pretty decent season, make a bowl game, and kind of develop something there. But it'll be interesting to see what he does in year 2. He was finally able to kind of come in, get his first recruiting class, his first transfer class, and see how he puts those pieces together.
Yeah, I agree with you there. So I will go first with number 9. My number 9 spot, I've got Mike Elko. The reason I have him a little bit higher on my list is because he has done it as a head coach before. Y'all mentioned, he took a bad Duke team and in his first season went 9-4. Had another successful season last year in which they were a couple plays away from beating Florida State. That would have really solidified a good season for, or I guess you could say a great season at that point for Duke. So he's done it as a head coach before. We'll see how he does at Texas A&M. Another one that I don't know what your expectations are exactly for him this year. Obviously, you want to succeed being at Texas A&M, but what exactly is that bar for him? Is there pressure for him in year 1? And I just don't think so. So I think he'll go out there. He'll have his guys playing free. I think he's going to have a good year at A&M. I think he will have a good coaching career at Texas A&M. But year 1 in the SEC, we'll see how he does. But that's why I have Mike Elko at number 9. Landon.
Yeah, I'm going to go Kirby Smart. No, I'm joking. I'm going Hugh Freeze. I think Hugh did some pretty impressive things with the quarterback room last year. Like, I don't think anyone looks at Peyton Thorne and thinks, man, there's a guy that can really lead us to 10, 11, 12 wins. And Hugh made it work. I know they did not have a phenomenal season, but with starting off and I would say that the lack of talent in that department, I think just on that merit alone, he's done well. But we'll see how it goes. You got to last year was his first year back in the SEC after a while at this level of competition. And at Liberty, obviously he elevated their program a lot, but anytime they went up against the big boys, it wasn't always a great result. So we'll see how it goes. But I think Hugh's a good spot.
Yeah, that's a good spot for him. Caleb, who do you have at number 9?
Yeah, number 9, I'm going to go with, like you said, Mike Elko. He's a guy that, came into a Duke program, turning them around. He's coming back to a Texas A&M program that he was at before in the defensive coordinator spot. A program he's familiar with, kind of has an idea of what they expect, but, it might be a little bit different for him. You kind of saw an example of maybe how you don't succeed with all the success that Jimbo had as far as all those really top recruiting classes, all the support you can have from the boosters, the facilities, everything. And he still just couldn't put it together. So I think, him coming in familiar with this program, he understands that, yes, there's a want there that they should be winning. They consider themselves one of the top programs with, what they can do financially and things. But, it'll be interesting to see what he does. Similar to some other schools that lost coaches, they did lose quite a bit in the transfer portal after Jimbo, was let go with his buyout. But it'll be interesting to see what he does with the players that stayed, what he's able to bring in, and what he's able to do with the program he's been at before in year one, where he is the head guy and takes over.
Yeah. Daniel, who do you have at number 9?
Number 9, I'm sure this is going to be controversial, but I do have Stoops at Kentucky. And it's more so about the people ahead of him at this point than it is about the people, than about him. I mean, he's done a really solid job for Kentucky. Almost every year, bowl eligibility, some years jumping up to much higher heights. And he's taken advantage of Florida's down years, which in the past Kentucky could not do. And I do have to give him some credit just to have a little fun here and say he has more wins over Florida in the last 20 years than one of Florida's rivals. So got to give him those props. But
yeah, I appreciate that little shot right there.
I got to have some fun, right?
Yeah.
Don't worry. I'm sure I'll see you. You'll be at the game in October, right? I'll come up, say hi.
We'll see. Talking about it, looking ahead to it, so might be there. So I do find it interesting here. Besides Mark Stoops, we all had the same names somewhere in that 9 through 16 list. So we'll move right ahead to number 8, Landon. Who do you have at your number 8 spot?
Yeah, I'm going to go Stoops here as well. Stoops has done a really good job for Kentucky. Those 2 10-win seasons were huge. He's oddly enough, all the time he's been there, he's only 8 games above 500. But for Kentucky, I mean, they'll keep him forever. It's a very similar situation that I can relate to with Mississippi State. If you can win enough games, then we'll stay forever. If you will stay as well. So, with the talent that he has gotten there, I mean, you guys remember how it was before Stoops got there and got rolling. They had just not been respected for a long time. It was the early 2000s with Jared Lorenzen, and so I think this is a pretty good spot for him. He's average to above average. Now, the unfortunate thing, and it's none of our problems, but like, do you want to pay an average to above average guy that high of a salary is pretty bananas, but they'll keep winning in Kentucky. So I get it.
Yeah. Caleb, who do you have at number 8?
Yeah, I'm going to go Stoops as well. It's like, like you guys have been saying, like, for what he's done at Kentucky has been very consistent for the most part. With them, we'll call it like it is. They're a basketball school. So with him just having some consistent success, for the most part, being bowl eligible every year, coming in and, taking them to a decent bowl game, I think it's one of those things. He's going to stay there as long as he wants to stay there. He's in a comfortable spot where there's not a lot of pressure to be like, oh, well, we've got to contend for national championships. I mean, they love the success where he gets them to a bowl game every year. And, it's interesting to see his over the past few years, his tactic or, his strategy of we're not going to really worry about trying to recruit a quarterback. We're just going to go in the portal and pull a transfer quarterback. They've done that the past few seasons. You look at Will Levis a couple seasons ago. You look at their quarterback this past year coming in from NC State. It's he's got a good spot and is in a comfortable position there that, like you said, he'll stay there as long as they are happy with him and that he wants to be there.
Yeah. Daniel, who do you have at number 8?
Okay, this is where I think we get back on track with all of us having the same people in the, sets of numbers. This is where I have Freeze. Took over what was not a great situation. Obviously, finished 6 and 7. But I mean, this is a guy we've seen get it done at multiple schools, whether that's Mississippi State, whether that's Liberty. But then something to point out last year, I mean, he did have an ugly loss to New Mexico State. But then I look at the Georgia, Ole Miss, 2 teams with 10 plus wins, in Alabama, again, 10 plus wins. And there's a combined 17 points is the difference in that game, and a blown 4th down from beating his rival in the Iron Bowl year 1. Obviously you've got to win those, but year 1, the first year taking over a team and, taking those teams 4 quarters in a, 1-score game, I've got to give him credit. And I can only imagine once he gets guys that fit his system, because Brian Harsin was not running a Hugh Freeze offense, but he took what he had, did well in the transfer portal. Now, whether he ends up having the success he had before at Ole Miss, at Auburn, remains to be seen. But I think for a year 1 in the SEC, doing so well, and including going cross country to Cal and winning on the road in a night game at Cal. I forget what time that kicked off, but I remember it being a later one. 10:30 Eastern. So you're talking that's a 9:30 Auburn kick. So that in itself is also a pretty good win in the context of what you had to do for it. So I will put him ahead of Stoops because I think his ceiling is higher, but time will tell whether it really is or not.
Yeah, we've got the same list as far as 8 through 16, the same names, as I've got Mark Stoops at number 8 because of the consistency that he has had at Kentucky. He's had a couple of 10-win seasons, tends to bounce between 10 wins and 6 to 7 wins. So, I mean, and all of y'all mentioned it, that consistency it's good for Kentucky. I remember back in my younger years, it was pretty much guaranteed Kentucky and Vanderbilt at the end of the year were going to be wins for Tennessee because of the level of competition, or the level that Kentucky and Vanderbilt are both at. Vanderbilt still being at that level. But yeah, Mark Stoops has done well at Kentucky, and I kind of agree with y'all that I think as long as he decides to stay there, he will be there. But Kentucky fans are starting to now have higher expectations because of his success there. So how much longer are they going to be content with a 6-6, a 7-5 season when they have reached that 10-win mark a couple of times? But I do, it kind of like Florida is with Tennessee. Tennessee is that way with Kentucky. No matter how good Kentucky is, Kentucky just can't beat Tennessee, as they've only had 2 wins over Tennessee in the Mark Stoops years. Even I call them the dark years of Jeremy Pruitt and Butch Jones. I mean, Kentucky could only beat Tennessee twice. So it's kind of one of those types of situations there. But Mark Stoops is solidly at number 8 for me, sitting in the middle of the pack. Caleb, we'll start with you here at number 7.
Yeah, for me, number 7, I'm going to go with Drinkowitz at Missouri. I think he's a guy that they had, you got to admit, last year was tremendous success for them at Missouri. His first few seasons there were, okay, and there's some question marks, and then he comes out last year and has that fantastic season. But for me, and I've told people, I'm not sold on him in Missouri just yet. Show me that you can have that type of success multiple years in a row. Yeah, they had a great season last year, but can you come back out? You have your quarterback returning. You've got some pieces coming in. Can you recreate that success again and kind of establish or show that you're establishing a top tier program there? And, that's why I have him right here, is because I've seen what he did. Yes, last year was great, but can you do it at a consistent level and multiple years in a row?
Yeah, absolutely. Daniel, number 7.
Drinkwitz. He at least reached in the regular season 500 his first 3 years, so it probably would have much lower on this list after that, but jumped up last year. And one thing I've got to give him credit for is, even though he admitted to, I realized that me calling plays was not the best thing for this team. And so him showing that he's willing to, not do something that he loved for the betterment of the team when it was showing that it wasn't working. You got to give a guy credit. And what did he do? He went and hired the best person he could for the job, and it paid off. It was a gamble that paid off, and that self-recognition is definitely something I've got to praise. Again, I've got to see more consistency, so maybe I would flip him and Stoops possibly, but I think for now, at least getting to the highs of a New Year's Six bowl and beating Ohio State in it. I was just speaking with an Ohio State fan before this for Why We Huddle. So he had brought that game up. But with that said, seeing that there's potentially a high ceiling, that's why I have Drinkwitz at number 7, as we're still in that mixed match, could probably go in any of these slots.
Yeah, I mean, copy paste. I've got Drink at number 7. And the only reason that he's not higher on my list is because of the guys ahead of them, what they've already shown. I mean, for Drink, you had the two average years, and then all of a sudden you jump up and you go 11-2 last season. And Daniel, you kind of stole what I was going to say there. The recognition of me calling plays is not getting it done. I'm going to give that to somebody else. That is true growth as a head coach there, and it paid off in a huge way. I'm also with y'all. I've got to see it continue. But I do think, especially with the schedule that Missouri has this year, I think this season it will continue. We'll see how it goes down the line, but that's why I have Drink at number 7. Landon.
Yeah, I'll keep it short. Same thing, man. He has done really well. Last season was remarkable for Missouri, and if you take a look at Missouri's schedule for 2024. There is no reason why they cannot do the exact same they did last year or even better. It's there's some tough things with Alabama and Oklahoma, but other than that, a lot of winnable games on the schedule. He's a good coach.
Yeah. So number 6, Daniel, you're up.
This is where I'm going to maybe split. I don't know. 6, I have Josh Heupel. One thing I like, I think we've said before, I really liked Heupel when he was at UCF. I mean, there were some issues, but then you also had things like Dylan Gabriel, who we've talked about getting injured. But with that said, Heupel came in. Can't tell me that what was left for Heupel after Pruitt was too much different than what Florida inherited after Mullen. Plus, you had a probation type deal on top of that. And he said, all right, whatever, year 2 beat Alabama at home. And we all know what a special night that was for them. And I think beating your rivals is a big thing. With that said, comparatively to my top 5, he hasn't quite reached the highest of the highs, although some haven't arguably gotten there yet either. But he's done a lot. Last year, I think he took a little bit of a step back, and I think that was just Unfortunately, the QB situation wasn't what he thought it was, but now with Nico taking over one of his own recruits rather than one of these transfer quarterbacks, a kid who's now in his second year of the system, let's see what he does. I mean, I know the schedule's not completely easy. Always have Alabama. You've got, but you do have Florida at home, which I know has been a monkey on Tennessee's back for decades. I don't mean that as another like little shot in the arm, but
Yeah, no, it's just
Heupel's got to win that at home this year, to show, hey, I'm serious. Because many Vols fans that I talked to, I think we've talked about how my father-in-law's a Vols fan. It comes down to also how you do against Florida and Alabama. So last year, losing to a Florida team that ended up losing to an Arkansas, got blown out by Kentucky. I'm sure that was frustrating. So this year, got to get the job done against Florida and all the teams you're supposed to, where I think he's not necessarily done that so far, as well as being a competitive game against Georgia. But I think he definitely is in the top half of SEC coaches. And again, it's just comparatively at this point. So I'd put him at 6.
Yeah, so I did just get a message from Landon. He did have to go. I am going to ask him what the rest of his list is, so that maybe we can get that before we're done. But I've also got Heupel at number 6, and it's the reason I don't have him higher is because of that step back that he took last year. I mean, it was still a pretty good season for Tennessee. I mean, including the bowl game, you go 9-4, but you do have that loss to Florida. You do have the embarrassing loss to Missouri, where the 2 years prior you put up 60 plus points against Missouri. Now, granted, it was a different Missouri team, but I mean, you go into Missouri and get beat 38-7. I mean, just got embarrassed in that game. So I really love Heupel at Tennessee, and you mentioned it. I am fully invested in Nico and what he can do for Tennessee. I'm excited about the future, but he's right outside the top 5 for me. He's still trending in that upward progression for me, but he's also just a tier behind some of these top teams right now. Caleb.
Yeah, same thing as you guys. Number 6 is Josh Heupel. Like you said, last year was an interesting year as they took a little bit of step back from, that previous year where you get a win over in Alabama, which, is a program building win. At that time when, you beat Nick Saban, you get that win, you have a great season, and then you turn around this year and, with those expectations of building off that season. And then it kind of, like you said, not a bad season. You went 9-4, but still, you had some of those losses that kind of raised question marks, but it's going to be interesting this year to see, like you guys said, you've got Nico, his own recruit. He's been in the system. Now it's his time to take over. And what can he do with this team with a quarterback that was his own guy? And can he kind of get back to what type of season he had 2 years ago?
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm waiting on Landon to see if he can send his list, but we'll go ahead and move along. So number 5, I'll go first on this one. I have got Lane Kiffin at number 5, and I think that for me that is a really good spot for him because he has had 2 straight seasons, or maybe it's 2 out of the last 3 10-win seasons at Ole Miss, something that had never been done before he was there as the head coach at Ole Miss, and now he's done it twice. Now he has not had that just marquee win over a team. I guess you might consider Penn State in the bowl game last year that win, but against the Alabamas or the he did finally get LSU, but it was an LSU team that just could not stop anybody last year. But against some of those top teams, Georgia last year, he hadn't got that big win yet. So I do think that, depending on how they do this year, this is going to be Lane's last year at Ole Miss before he takes a bigger job. I mean, he's made it clear that he's not he's not satisfied with his situation at Ole Miss because there is a ceiling that I think he's just kind of bumping into there at Ole Miss, and he wants to go to a bigger job. But I mean, he's done a fantastic job at Ole Miss in the years he's been there, which is why I have him at number 5. Caleb?
Yeah, I'm going with Kiffin as well. It's a lot of the same things you said. You know, not that he's on the hot seat, but like you said, I think this could be a crucial year for him. As you know, he had with the having Dart come back, a lot of his offense come back. You know, the big names he pulled out of the transfer portal. He has set himself up for a successful year, and he needs one of those marquee wins. I mean, this year they're talking about that they could be a playoff contention team. Well, he's going to have to come out and show that and have some big wins. And with the talent that he brought in, there's not a reason that he shouldn't. Now, we'll see what happens against, like you said, against those teams like your Alabamas, your Georgias, and see what happens there. But I think, we know he's a guy that doesn't like to stick around one place for long. Plus, like you said, I think he is hitting that ceiling there at Ole Miss where, how far can you go with a team like Ole Miss in the SEC that has your Georgia, your Alabamas, your now Texas that are going to be some of those top teams where currently standing, I would say that they might be top 4, but that's on the edge there. But you look at they've got a very winnable schedule this season. They don't have a tough game until you're looking, week 6, 7 around LSU, and then you got Oklahoma, and then you have Georgia towards the end of the season. So you have the chance to go into that Georgia game potentially undefeated or maybe even one loss. And then that could be, it's a late November or early November game. That's in a pivotal part of the season where can you go and get that win? It is in Oxford. It's setting itself up to that could be a marquee win for him if they're able to pull that off in Oxford.
Yeah. Daniel?
Yeah, I've got Lane Kiffin as well. It definitely looks like he's built this team for this to be playoffs or bust this year, especially with the 12-team playoff expansion. Does have several tough games on the schedule. Last year played Georgia, did not look good. At the same time, he's had games where he has taken Alabama to the limit. And for a school with as limited resources comparatively to like your Georgias, Alabamas, Tennessee, Florida, Texas, Texas A&M, he's done phenomenal with what he had. I mean, heck, 2020 takes over an Ole Miss team that was 4-8 the previous year, has 0 spring practice, ends up being 5-5, and takes eventual national champion Alabama to the wire that year. And then he currently owns 2 of Ole Miss's 4 10-win seasons, the only 11-win season in their history. One school that's probably not taking him, I know we talked about him not sticking around for long, but one school he's made overtures to because his son is a big fan of, because of his grandfather, and that's UF. There's reasons why Florida would probably never take Lane Kiffin, and I'm not saying whether they should or not, but it is something. His trajectory at Ole Miss is something that has been watched by some Florida fans because he sent stuff like, "Hey, Billy Napier, check out this video of my son on on Twitter playing quarterback, when his son's out there slinging it around or whatnot." So it is kind of interesting, but yeah, he's definitely the coach who has shown he can do more with less and reach higher heights than the school's ever had. So I'm curious to see what he does this year.
Yeah, absolutely. So number 4, Caleb.
Yeah, number 4 for me is Kalen DeBoer at Alabama. I think you look at him compared to the 3 guys that are going to be above him. He's the newcomer to the SEC, and he has extremely big shoes to fill. I was talking to somebody today. I think that even though it's his first season, not saying it's a hot seat season for him, but this Alabama program expects near perfection. That's what they got out of Nick Saban, his tenure there. He built the program that it is, and you don't want a guy to come in and have just an average, season. Like he wins, I think he needs to win or not lose more than maybe 2 games. I think that's the expectation for him coming in. And, I will say when you look at Alabama and, with how short their process was for hiring Kalen DeBoer, I think this was a guy that, Saban probably had a big hand in saying, okay, you're my successor. And he was probably at the top of a very short list of guys that he said, all right, well, I'm going to retire. And, here's my input on who needs to be brought in to take over. And I'm very interested to see what a a Alabama team looks like with no Nick Saban on the sideline. Do you still have that almost like robotic performance where they come out and they just perform like they're expected to? Is there that accountability that Saban had with all of his players? Like, what does that look like? And I want to see what he does with Jalen Milroe. He had a success with Michael Penix last year. Can he kind of mold Milroe into that type of player? Not saying they're exactly the same type of player, but I feel like they can fit in the same type of system. And what can he do with that amount of pressure and knowing that I'm the head coach at Alabama and there's huge expectations, even in my first year?
Yeah, Daniel.
I've got DeBoer as well. Here's a fun stat for you: is head coaching, whether we're talking when he was at Sioux Falls, Fresno State, or Washington. If you take out the COVID year, which was his first year at Fresno State, as we talked about, there's no spring practice COVID year to get people into your system. There's all sorts of, new things that unfortunately hamper new coaches during that year. And I give the same bit of grace to like a Mike Norvell, who have their own specific systems. Well, if you don't have a spring practice to install them in a very limited fall, you're not going to do as well. But anyways, I only bring that up because the worst winning percentage he has ever had, and it's in a season, is a 75%, and that's his second year at Fresno State. Every other single season besides the COVID year and that second season at Fresno State, he's only had 1 or 2 losses wherever he's been. So I think this is a guy who is shown he's a proven winner at any level he's been at. Like talking about that Fresno State took a 3-3 team in 2020, again with whatever issues were inherited plus COVID, and then made them 9-3 the next year. Goes to Washington, takes over a team that was kind of so-so, and goes 11-2. Next year he's in the college football national championship game and makes a heck of a game with it. So obviously high expectations for him, but based on his past, I think there's a chance he could be just as, I don't want to say just as successful as Nick Saban because that's insane, but he could end up being just as successful as they could legitimately hope for, I guess is the best way of putting it.
Yeah, I mean, copy paste, guys. I've got DeBoer there as well. You mentioned it, Daniel. He's a proven winner. My question is, does the pressure of following somebody as great as Nick Saban get to him? I don't think it will, but I think Caleb, you mentioned it, that if you lose more than 2 games and you don't make the 12-team playoffs in year 1, that pressure immediately rises for year 2. And because Alabama fans, they're not going to accept anything less than success at Alabama, and I think that success is at least making the 12-team playoffs. And you've made it almost every single year in the 14 playoffs. It should be easy for that 12-team playoff, even without Nick Saban on the sidelines. So, because he's a proven winner as a head coach, I think that 4 is a great spot. The reason he's not any higher on my list is because he hasn't done it in the SEC yet. So that's why I have Kalen DeBoer at number 4. Number 3, Daniel, you're up.
I've got Steve Sarkisian. last year. He took about 3 years to take Texas from where they were to where we expect them to be now. I mean, year 4 now, but in year 3, he's kicking down the door of the playoffs. He's winning in Bryant Denny. Um, he's gotten everywhere but to hoisting that trophy. So I expect this is a guy who has learned from the mistakes of his past, which we've seen with some people going through the Nick Saban rehab clinic, as some people will refer to coaching rehab clinic. And, what he's done at Texas after years of them being, you know, up and down, never quite getting to where they want them to be. And now he has them right there. I mean, heck, year 2, he was in a battle and should have won that game. I'm not going to say arguably. I'm going to say there was an awful call that should have happened that took points off the board. That game's over if that happens. But point is, he's done well. He's a guy who has shown he can win at a big program. Now it's just do it in the SEC, which he's already gotten a win on the road at a big SEC stadium. So we'll see if it continues.
Yeah, so my number 3, I've got Brian Kelly. Year 1, he takes over LSU, and he does get a big win against Alabama that ended up being the deciding factor in making the SEC championship game. You also, in that same season, had an embarrassing loss at home to Tennessee, in which, Tennessee fans took over your stadium. And then last season, you had the Heisman Trophy winner along with 2 first-round wide receivers, and you go 10-3, including the bowl game. And the problem is you just couldn't stop anybody, even with a defense that arguably should have been in the top half, if not the top 3 or 4 of the SEC, just based on the players that were on that team. So, Brian Kelly, he's a great coach. He has proven it from his different stops, Notre Dame beforehand, now at LSU. It's just one of those things for me. How much longer can he be that, I guess, general manager type head coach and have success when you've got all of these gurus as head coaches now, whether it be offensive or defensive head coach? So that's why I have Brian Kelly. He's not trending up or down. He's just kind of flatlining a little bit. And I feel like he's been in that flatline situation for a while, even going back to Notre Dame. I want to see a little bit more, and I think the LSU fans are going to start asking for more from him. So, Caleb.
Yeah, number 3 for me, I'm gonna go with you there on Brian Kelly. He's one of those guys that, came in, had the success at LSU, and had the Heisman winner last year. But it's almost seems like a thing that has kind of been tied with him. Is even in his days at Notre Dame, there's been times where he's had the talent and kind of struggled to get some wins there. He's had pieces around him, like you said, he had a great defense last year that should have been in the top half there. You have the Heisman winning quarterback, you have 2 top talented wide receivers, and you don't get some big wins there, and like you said, the LSU fan base isn't going to stay content for long. They're going to want to see that continued success and challenging for SEC titles. If you think back to the Les Miles days, where he was always, it was LSU, Alabama, contending every year and battling each other. And, I'm interested to see, he has a guy in Garrett Nussmeier that's going to be the projected starter this year that doesn't have a ton of, has been around a while, but does not have a ton of starting experience. And, what does he do having to fill big shoes of Jalen Daniels? So,
yeah, and for me on Garrett Nussmeier, he's a totally different style quarterback than Jane Daniels. So what's that offense going to look like this year? That's what intrigues me. Is that defense going to actually be able to stop somebody this year? So that's where I have Brian Kelly at number 3. number 2, it's going to be Steve Sarkisian. I mean, he has steadily gone up at Texas there after going through the quote unquote Nick Saban rehab center there for coaches. And then last year, got Texas to the college football playoffs. Unfortunately, couldn't get the win in the semifinals to get to the championship game. But you're returning a good chunk of your roster there. I mean, you do lose starting running back to the draft. You lose a couple of other pieces, but you return starting quarterback from last season, a team that you mentioned it, Daniel, went into Alabama last year and got a win on the road and arguably should have won the year before at home. You know, intentional grounding, safety, whatever you want to call it. I mean, it's a team that should very well be challenging Georgia for the top spot in the SEC this year. Should definitely make the college football playoffs this year. Sarkisian has done a fantastic job. There is also in the back of everyone's mind the past failures that Sark has had, but I'm solely ranking this on where he is at right now, and that is number 2 in the SEC as a head coach. Caleb?
Yeah, I'm a follow along, like you said. For me, it's Steve Sarkisian. There, he's gotten Texas back to where they wanted to be, and kind of found a guy that got him back to the after Mac Brown. They really just went through coach after coach after coach and could never get back to consistent spots at like where they were at with Mac Brown. And now Steve Sarkisian comes in, like you said, had them on the verge last year. Easily should be competing for SEC title this year with Georgia. I've said it even on, other shows where to me, I'm circling October 19th, Georgia versus Texas. That is going to be one of the best, if not the best game in college football this season. And I think it has a lot of implication. Who wins the SEC, potential playoff spots. And, when you have a returning quarterback in Quinn Ewers that's inexperienced, one quote I heard that I think is going to be big is can Sarkisian get Quinn Ewers from being a really good quarterback last year to a great quarterback this year? And I think that's what it's going to take for him to, get to those expectations that everybody has. Is can he be a great quarterback? And that battle against Carson Beck in Georgia is going to be where, I think that's going to be highlighted is when they get to that point, who's going to come out of that battle and potentially be the winning SEC champion after that game.
Yeah, Daniel?
I've got Brian Kelly. I mean, Sark is also, as you guys have put, a good answer here. Reason I have Brian Kelly is just the longevity of success that he's had. Like we talked about longevity with Stoops, and he got Notre Dame to the playoffs now multiple times. Granted, it didn't turn out too well any times, but he also walked on the LSU campus with 40 scholarship players, and ended up with a team in year one that's beating Alabama with 2 true freshman tackles. Granted, last year was a letdown for him. Life in the SEC does happen. He also, we've talked about recognition. He recognized his defensive coordinator wasn't getting the job done and has found someone. Hopefully he's made the right hire. Well, for me, hopefully not. I'd love to beat LSU again. It's been a hot minute since we did. But it's the longevity that really has me at 2, where I see the upward trajectory of Sark. And I'm like, can he do that? Which I think he will. Probably next year I'll have Sark higher if I had to take a guess. But for now, that's why I have the flip-flop with you guys. And we all know who number 1 is. I'll go and kick it off. I think we can just go ahead and end here. Everyone smile, nod, say Kirby. We don't need to analyze it. All the Georgia fans can be upset, and I'll just smile, thumbs up, and we'll get out of here, right? Right.
Yeah. I mean, it's obvious that Kirby is number 1. And, even if Saban was still in the league, obviously Nick Saban is the greatest college head coach, if not the greatest head coach of all time. But sitting here today, Kirby is a better coach than Nick Saban just because of the trends that the two coaches have been on. Not that Nick Saban has been trending down, but Kirby has trended his program up to a point where, I mean, he's been doing better than Nick Saban. Now, granted, you could also sit here and say, well, he only beat Nick Saban one time, and that was in the playoffs. Um, but I think when it comes to the overall success of the programs here lately, that's why even if Saban was still in the league, I would have Kirby as the number one coach over Nick Saban. But
Yep.
yeah, it was obvious going in where we all had Kirby Smart. But Caleb, do you want to chip in any comments on Kirby?
Yeah,
Nah.
I think it's one of those things where, two of these three top guys we're talking about between Kirby and Sark came from the Saban coaching tree. I mean, I think that speaks bounds for like what you're saying is easily one of the greatest coaches is, you have two successors that have their teams at the top. And when you think about Kirby Smart, I think he really learned and just took a lot of knowledge from Saban and how he built that program up at Georgia. He came from as a defensive minded guy at being the coordinator at Alabama, and then coming over and taking over Georgia, which a program that was just middle of the pack in the SEC under Mark Richt. And when they decided to move on from him and having Kirby Smart come in and kind of build that program there, and like you were saying, Michael, with even if Saban was still coaching, it's really hard to not say that Kirby's not number one right now. He's really turned that Georgia program into a powerhouse. And, he learned a lot from his time under Saban and really put that to good use. And, it's very clear that he's currently the number one coach in the SEC and not if in the country right now.
Yeah, and before we hop off here, I do have one question now I want to hear answer from both of you on. How long do you think Kirby can keep winning the way that he is right now? Because Nick Saban, for the start of his career when they started winning games, it was built the same way that Kirby is building. You had a fantastic defense, you had an awesome offense with a mediocre to good quarterback at the helm. But then towards the end of Saban's career, he also had to have a good quarterback to help along the way as well. How long before Kirby is going to have to start having elite quarterback play to get him to those national titles as well, Caleb?
Yeah, I think if he keeps winning, and continuing the success, he'll be around for I think several more years to come. But I think a big key into that is what does the development and changes look like for NIL? I think that's going to be a determining factor for a lot of programs. As in back in the day in Saban's prime there at Alabama, if you're a kid that you got an offer, Saban said, "Hey, come to Alabama and play for me." It was over. It doesn't matter who else was recruiting you. It was over. And I think that's how it's been for Georgia here recently. But with the introduction of NIL, yeah, you're like, okay, yeah, it'd be really cool to go play for Georgia and what they've got built there. But, I've got this other team, whoever it may be, offering me just as much or maybe a little bit more money for me to come play at their school. And so I think can they continue to the success, but also keep on the NIL train and, keep that top talent coming in, whether it be with NIL or just because they want to come play for one of the top teams in college.
Yeah. Daniel?
Honestly, I'm of a different take on this one in a little bit of a way. If you remember when Nick Saban came in 2007 to Alabama, wasn't no one knew what was about to happen at Alabama the next few years. In fact, at the time, you had a coach at Florida that had won a national title in 2006, Heisman Trophy winner in 2007, wins a national title in 2008, beats that Saban team, and they were supposed to be the team, for the foreseeable future, can't be beat. Well, then the next year end up going 13-1, and then we all know what's happened 2010 onwards with Florida. The reason why I bring up that history lesson is when you ask me how long will Kirby be there, Well, I think it depends on the new state of the SEC. Does like Sarkeesian and Texas end up making a big difference, especially as we're talking about NIL and catching up? Texas, oil money, maybe Mike Elko. If you start seeing a bunch of these great teams really step up, if you start seeing Tennessee really being Tennessee again, if you see whether it's Billy Napier or whether it's someone else. If Florida makes a hire that works out, like Heupel seems to be doing at Tennessee, where maybe it just changes the game, like how Nick Saban came in and changed the game from Urban Meyer and kind of switch gears. I think that's really what the key is. It's as long as the rest of the SEC will let them, I guess is one way of putting it. Uh, but if some teams get hot and actually start, putting the pressure on, especially with NIL, who knows what could happen. But until, the teams show they've got it right and there's, some other teams that can stand there in that top spot, it is what it is. It's going to go on forever, which I think Florida may have if they didn't run into the Nick Saban buzzsaw that caused, Urban Meyer spiral. And that's what I'm going to think about Kirby, unless someone becomes that new buzzsaw, which arguably Kirby was also to Saban. Although we said he plateaued, we also said, he plateaued, but we wouldn't put him ahead of Kirby. Kirby's built the new juggernaut. So until we see someone have that new juggernaut, I think it's as long as Kirby can keep it. Which I'm of course stealing a quote from, a democracy as long as you can keep it. I think that was Thomas Jefferson or Thomas Paine that said that. Of course, some history buff is going to come on and say, well, it was this founding father, but I think that's the general sentiment for Kirby and how long he'll dominate at Georgia.
Yeah, I mean, I think y'all are right on that. I just, I look at what Saban did and how he eventually had to have that elite quarterback to maintain that success. And that's why I brought up the question, do you think that it'll come to that with Kirby Smart, and how long do you think it'll be? I think he is eventually going to have to start getting that elite talent at Georgia to maintain that success. But I mean, the way that things are going right now, even in the NIL world, it's kind of like you said, Daniel. It's his until somebody else can prove that they can compete.
Yep.
So, guys, this has been a fantastic show tonight. I appreciate y'all coming on. Daniel, do you want to tell the folks where they can find you?
Yes, you can find me on Twitter at Gator Podcast. Anywhere, my Gator Podcast is the Gator Truth Florida Football Podcast. You can find us on YouTube. You can find us pretty much anywhere you get your podcast. Also, I host a show for the College Huddle on the College Huddle main feed called Why We Huddle, where we look into the different podcast hosts of the College Huddle, and we talk about their schools, what makes the school special, about their fandom and their relationship, the podcaster's relationship with the school, and then about the podcast itself and what particular angles they take for their school. And through seeing their love for the school and their podcast, definitely worth checking out all sorts of the different ones that we have for the College Huddle and learn about schools you never knew about. 2 weeks ago, Kennesaw State, the newest member to the FBS. I learned a lot I didn't know, including their stadium's nicknamed the Bank. So definitely check that out if you get a chance.
Yeah, absolutely. Caleb, you want to tell the folks where they can find you?
Yeah, Hogs on the Hill, whether it be Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, YouTube, that's where you can find us. Spotify, Apple Podcast, everywhere you can find your podcast. We do weekly shows. We're getting ready to start up our the way I like to call it, our position breakdowns. This week we'll have our first one as we go through each week by week, each position group, and how we think that's going to look for the upcoming season. So yeah.
Yeah, and Landon unfortunately was not able to end the show with us, but you can find Landon at the My Dogs Are Barking Pod on YouTube. You can also find him on Twitter. I'm sure probably Spotify and Apple and some of those other places as well. But that's where you will find Landon. You can find myself, the Vol Fanatics Show on YouTube, Spotify, Apple, Facebook, and Instagram at Vol Fanatics 1998. on Twitter, and we're kind of doing something similar, Caleb, to where we have started our position breakdowns. We have done 2 of them now, and we have it kind of worked out where each week we're going to have one position preview up to the first week of college football, and we're doing our schedule predictions. Skylar and I are on the Vol Fanatic Show. We're going to have 2 of those per week up to week 1. So exciting times, is getting closer and closer to college football season. And I don't know about you guys, but I cannot wait. It's going to be a fun season, but from all of us here at the SEC, we appreciate you tuning in, and tune in again next week on the SEC Huddle.